The Imperial fortress loomed on the horizon, a colossus of durasteel and arrogance carved into the barren surface of Kargan V, a desolate world at the Empire's core. Its spires stretched toward the stars like claws, and its heavily armed battlements bristled with weaponry. It was a fortress designed to repel armies, but Kael Vorthan, the Baba Yaga, was no army. He was a storm condensed into a single man. The sleek silhouette of Kael's ship glided silently through the atmosphere, cloaked by the electromagnetic interference of Kargan's violent storms. Lightning illuminated the fortress in brief flashes, revealing the relentless patrols and automated defenses scanning the terrain. Kael's HUD displayed the facility's schematics, a partial map he had extracted from the last outpost. It was incomplete, but it was enough. He landed the ship in a jagged ravine just outside the fortress's sensor range. As the engines cooled, Kael donned his armor, each piece locking into place with a reassuring hiss. His blasters were holstered at his sides, and his combat knife sat sheathed on his chest. He secured a small pack of explosives, tools of precision destruction. Kael stepped out into the storm, his movements fluid and deliberate. The howl of the wind masked his approach as he scaled the rocky terrain. The fortress loomed closer with every step, its defenses oblivious to the predator in their midst. Inside the fortress, Commander Valtan stood before a massive holodeble, its surface glowing with tactical readouts. His officers reported in crisp, nervous tones, detailing the increased security measures. Valtan had spared no resource fortifying the facility, fully aware that the Baba Yaga was coming. "All patrols report no signs of intrusion, sir," one officer said. Valtan nodded, but remained unsatisfied. "Stay vigilant. He won't attack where we expect him. That's not his style." General Orlan, standing nearby, observed quietly. "Sometimes the most dangerous man is the one you never see coming," he said. Valtan shot him a sharp look. "This isn't a philosophy lesson, General. This is war." Kael breached the outer perimeter with clinical precision, disabling sensors and cameras as he moved. He left no trace of his passage, each action calculated to avoid alerting the garrison. When he reached the main compound, he scaled the sheer walls, his grappling line latching onto an outcropping. He ascended swiftly, his movements a ghostly blur against the stormlit sky. He entered through a maintenance vent, the confined space forcing him to move carefully. His HUD mapped the interior, overlaying the limited schematics with real-time updates. He moved through the labyrinthine corridors, bypassing checkpoints and neutralizing isolated guards with silent efficiency. Kael's objective was clear: the detention wing. The facility's prisoners, including his sons, were held deep within its bowels. Every step brought him closer to them, and closer to the reckoning he had promised the Empire. The fortress erupted into chaos as Kael's presence was finally detected. Alarms blared, and soldiers flooded the corridors. Valtan watched the holodeble as reports streamed in. "He's inside," an officer said, his voice trembling. Valtan's jaw tightened. "Seal the detention wing. Cut him off from his objective." The order was carried out, but Valtan knew it wouldn't stop the Baba Yaga. He turned to Orlan. "We'll confront him ourselves. Ready the elite guard." Orlan hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish." Kael pressed forward, his every move a symphony of destruction. He dispatched squads of soldiers with ruthless precision, his blasters roaring and his knife striking with lethal efficiency. The corridors were littered with the aftermath of his onslaught, yet Kael moved unscathed, his focus unyielding. He reached the sealed doors of the detention wing, where a squad of elite guards awaited him. Their armor was heavier, their weapons deadlier, but none of it mattered. Kael engaged them in a brutal melee, his movements a blur of calculated violence. Blaster bolts ricocheted off walls, and cries of pain echoed as Kael dismantled the squad one by one. When the last guard fell, Kael hacked into the door's controls. The lock disengaged with a hiss, and the heavy door slid open, revealing a corridor lined with cells. Kael moved quickly, his gaze scanning the faces of the prisoners until he found them. His sons, bound but unharmed, looked up in shock as he entered. "Father," one of them whispered. Kale's expression softened, a rare moment of vulnerability breaking through the hardened exterior. "I'm here," he said, cutting their restraints. "We're leaving." The reunion was brief. Alarms blared anew, signaling reinforcements. Kale led his sons through the labyrinth of the facility, his protective instincts overriding all else. Every encounter with the Empire's forces ended in their defeat, but Kale knew they couldn't hold out forever. In the central atrium, Commander Valtan waited with General Orlan and the remaining elite guard. The room was a cavernous space, its high ceilings echoing with the sound of distant combat. Kale entered, his sons behind him. He stopped at the threshold, his blasters drawn, his eyes locked with Vultan's. "So, you're the Baba Yaga," Valtan said, his voice filled with both disdain and grudging respect. "I expected someone larger." Kale's lips twitched into a cold smile. "And I expected someone smarter." Valtan drew his blade, the weapon gleaming under the harsh lights. "This ends here." Kale advanced, his sons retreating to the shadows. The room became a battlefield. Kale's blasters against Vultan's blade and the guard's firepower. The clash was relentless, a dance of death where every move was calculated and every strike lethal. One by one, the guards fell. Orlan, wounded but alive, retreated as the fight narrowed to Kale and Valtan. Their battle was ferocious, the clash of skill and fury reverberating through the atrium. Finally, Kale disarmed Valtan, the commander's blade clattering to the floor. Kale aimed his blaster at Vultan's chest. "The Empire took everything from me. Now, it's your turn." Valtan sneered. "Killing me won't stop the Empire." Kale's expression was unreadable as he replied, "No, but it's a start." He fired, and Valtan fell. Kale turned to his sons, their eyes wide with awe and fear. "Let's go," he said. Together, they disappeared into the storm, leaving the shattered fortress behind. The Baba Yaga had delivered his reckoning, but his war was far from over. The Empire would feel his wrath, and the galaxy would remember his name. Commander Vultan's boots clicked against the polished durasteel floor of the Imperial Command Center. The room was a stark contrast to the chaos brewing across the galaxy, a cold, clinical hub of power where decisions were made and lives were destroyed. Massive holoscreens lined the walls, displaying real-time data streams of Imperial operations. Officers moved with mechanical efficiency, their faces betraying no emotion as they carried out orders. Valtan stood at the center of it all, his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was as sharp as the ceremonial blade at his side. Despite the outward calm, a storm brewed within him. Reports of an unidentified threat had begun to trickle in from the outer systems, a ghost tearing through Imperial installations with lethal precision. The name whispered among survivors sent a chill down his spine. The Baba Yaga. He had dismissed the initial reports as the ramblings of terrified soldiers. But now, with each passing day, the evidence mounted. Entire squads had been wiped out, relay stations destroyed, and critical data compromised. The methods were unmistakable. Surgical strikes, no collateral damage, and no survivors. It was the work of a professional, one whose skills rivaled the Empire's finest. Valtan turned to face one of his subordinates, a young lieutenant who stood stiffly at attention. "Status update," Valtan demanded, his voice a blade of authority. The lieutenant's voice wavered slightly as he replied, "Sir, we've lost contact with Outpost Data 7. Preliminary reports indicate it was infiltrated and neutralized. Surveillance footage confirms the presence of a single operative." Vultan's jaw tightened. "And the data?" "Compromised, sir. The operative extracted classified coordinates before eliminating the garrison." The commander's fist clenched at his side. He had underestimated his adversary, and the consequences were becoming painfully clear. This was no ordinary rebel. This was a predator, one who hunted with purpose and precision. "Dispatch reinforcements to all key installations," Valten ordered, his voice cold and measured. "Double security protocols and increase patrols. I want this operative found and eliminated." The lieutenant hesitated, then asked, "Sir, if I may, who is this operative?" Valten's eyes narrowed as he turned back to the holoscreens. "A ghost from the past, a relic of an era we thought long gone. But make no mistake, Lieutenant, this ghost is very real." As the young officer departed to carry out his orders, Valten's thoughts turned inward. The Baba Yaga was more than a legend. He was a force of nature, one that defied the Empire's control. And now, that force was bearing down on them, driven by a vendetta that burned brighter than the Empire's might. In the shadows of the command center, an older officer approached, his weathered face etched with experience. General Orlon was one of the few men Valten respected, a veteran of countless campaigns who had seen the rise and fall of empires. "You look troubled, Commander," Orlon said, his tone measured. Valten did not respond immediately. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Do you believe in ghosts, General?" Orlon's lips twitched into a faint smile. "I believe in consequences. And from what I've heard, this Baba Yaga is no ghost. He's a consequence of our actions." Valten's gaze hardened. "He's a threat to the Empire, one we must eliminate before it's too late." The general's expression turned grave. "Be careful, Valten. Desperation can lead to mistakes. And this is a foe who thrives on mistakes." Valten nodded, though his resolve remained unshaken. He would not allow this specter to undermine the Empire's authority. The Baba Yaga was a threat, yes, but he was also a man, and men could be broken. As the command center buzzed with activity, Valten began to formulate a plan. He would not wait for the Baba. Kale Vorthen's ship sliced through the black void of space like a dagger, its engines humming with a low, predatory growl. In the cockpit, Kale's gaze was fixed on the glowing console in front of him, where a digital map displayed the scattered remnants of the Empire's communication network. Each pulse of light represented a potential lead, a thread to follow in his relentless pursuit. The Empire's trail had grown cold, but Kale was no ordinary hunter. His mind, honed by years of covert operations, worked tirelessly to piece together the fragments of intelligence he had gathered. The gunships that had taken his sons bore markings specific to an elite battalion, one known for its precision strikes and brutal efficiency. They were ghosts, operating in the shadows, but Kale knew how to hunt ghosts. He leaned back in his seat, the worn leather creaking under his weight. His thoughts drifted to Eldora, to the faces of his sons, their laughter now a haunting memory. The fire within him burned brighter, fueled by a promise he had made to himself. He would find them, no matter the cost. The ship's sensors pinged, pulling him from his reverie. A small outpost had appeared on the edge of his map, its faint signal indicating it was still operational. Kale's fingers danced across the console, pulling up the outpost data. It was an Imperial relay station, likely abandoned after the Empire's recent consolidation of power. But Kale knew better than to dismiss it. The Empire's arrogance often left behind loose ends, and he was an expert at unraveling them. The outpost came into view, a jagged structure clinging to the side of an asteroid. Kale guided the ship into a stealthy approach, his movements precise and deliberate. The landing was smooth, the ship's engines shutting down with a soft whine. Kale donned his helmet, the HUD springing to life with a cascade of data, and stepped onto the desolate surface of the asteroid. Inside the outpost, the air was stale and cold, a testament to its abandonment. Kale moved through the corridors with the silence of a predator, his senses attuned to every sound and shadow. He reached the central terminal, its screen flickering weakly. With practiced efficiency, he hacked into the system, bypassing layers of encryption to access the relay's logs. His efforts were rewarded. Among the fragmented data was a transmission log. its entries marked with the coordinates of Imperial movements. Kale's eyes narrowed as he studied the information, his mind racing to connect the dots. One entry stood out. A recent transmission from Commander Valtan referencing a secured transport heading to a classified facility. Kale's lips curled into a grim smile. He had found his lead. As he downloaded the data, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. Kale's hand instinctively went to his blaster, drawing it with practiced ease. He pressed himself against the wall, his breathing steady as he waited. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the unmistakable clink of armor. A squad of Imperial soldiers entered the room, their weapons at the ready. Kale acted without hesitation, his blaster firing with deadly precision. The first soldier fell before he could react, a smoking hole in his chest. The others scattered, returning fire as Kale moved with the fluid grace of a predator. He ducked and weaved, his shots finding their marks with unerring accuracy. Within moments, the room was silent once more, the soldiers lying motionless on the cold floor. Kale holstered his weapon, his expression unreadable. He had no time to dwell on the encounter. The Empire would soon realize their men were missing. He retrieved the data and made his way back to his ship, his mind focused on the path ahead. As the ship lifted off, Kale plotted a course to the coordinates he had uncovered. The classified facility was deep within Imperial territory, a fortress shrouded in secrecy. It was a place few dared to approach, let alone infiltrate. But Kale was not like most men. He thrived on the impossible, turning the Empire's strengths into vulnerabilities. The stars stretched into lines as the ship entered hyperspace, its destination clear. Kale's resolve hardened with each passing moment. The Empire had taken his sons, but they had also made a grave mistake. They had underestimated him. For Kale Vorthan, the Baba Yaga, the hunt had truly begun. Night had fallen over the settlement of Eldera, but for Dorian Vorthan, there was no solace in its quiet darkness. He stood in the shadow of his modest home, its walls still bearing the marks of the Empire's assault. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, though his mind was elsewhere, in the corridors of his past, where a different name had defined him. Kale, that had been his name once, before the galaxy whispered it with dread, before it became synonymous with death and vengeance. He had been Kale Vorthan, a name that struck fear into the hearts of kings and emperors alike. But time and love had buried that man beneath layers of peace, hidden behind the guise of a humble farmer. Now, with his sons taken and his world shattered, Kale was all that remained. Dorian knelt on the packed dirt of his home's cellar, uncovering a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. From its depths, he retrieved a long, black case. His hands, steady despite the storm in his heart, unlatched it to reveal weapons long dormant. A pair of intricately crafted blasters, a combat knife with an edge that gleamed like starlight, and a lightweight suit of armor, all relics of a life he had sworn to leave behind. He picked up one of the blasters, its weight familiar in his hand. It had been years, but his grip was sure, his aim unshaken. Kale had been a weapon once, forged in the fires of war and honed to deadly precision by the Syndicate, an organization as secretive as it was ruthless. They had trained him to be the perfect assassin, an unstoppable force who would leave no trace but devastation in his wake. Kale's hand tightened around the weapon as memories surged unbidden. Missions carried out with surgical precision, targets eliminated without hesitation. He had been a shadow, a ghost, a legend whispered among soldiers and criminals alike. And then he had disappeared, vanishing into obscurity to find a life beyond the bloodshed. But peace had been an illusion, one shattered by the Empire's cruelty. His sons' faces flashed in his mind, their laughter echoing in his ears. The fire that had once driven him reignited, burning hotter than ever. The Baba Yaga was not just a name, it was a promise, one the galaxy would learn to fear again. Kale rose, his armor strapped to his frame, the weapon secured at his side. He stepped out into the cold night, the stars above a distant reminder of the vastness of the galaxy. Somewhere out there, His sons were captives, their fate uncertain. Somewhere out there, the men who had taken them were laughing, ignorant of the storm that was coming for them. He moved with purpose to the edge of the settlement, where an old starship lay dormant. It was a relic of his past, a sleek and agile craft built for speed and stealth. Cale ran his hand along its hull, feeling the familiar contours beneath his fingers. It roared to life with a touch of his hand, its engines humming with anticipation. As he prepared to leave, a voice called out from the shadows. It was Lorne, an older man and the closest thing Eldra had to a leader. "You're going after them, aren't you?" Cale paused, his expression unreadable. "I have to. They're my sons." Lorne stepped closer, his face lined with worry. "You'll need allies, Cale. The Empire's reach is vast." Cale shook his head. "Allies slow you down. This is my fight." The older man sighed but didn't argue. He knew Cale's resolve was unshakable. "Then may the stars guide you." Cale nodded once before boarding the ship. The hatch sealed behind him, and moments later, the craft rose into the night sky, disappearing among the stars. The hunt had begun, and with it, the galaxy's reckoning. For Cale Vorthen, the Baba Yaga was back. The twin suns of Arion blazed down upon the quiet settlement of Eldra. Tucked away on the outer rim of the galaxy, this colony was a haven for those seeking refuge from the iron grip of the galactic empire. Rows of modest homes stretched out in orderly lines, surrounded by fertile fields that shimmered with the glow of native crops. Children laughed as they played along the dusty streets, their innocence untouched by the harsh realities of the galaxy beyond. Among the bustling townsfolk, Dorian Vorthen stood at the edge of the settlement, a broad-shouldered farmer with calloused hands. Dorian was a man of quiet strength. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, a trace of unease shadowing his otherwise stoic demeanor. Something felt off. The air carried a weight that had nothing to do with the heat. A faint hum broke the serene quiet, a sound alien to the peaceful world of Eldra. Dorian's gaze shot skyward, his heart sinking as he saw them. Sleek, black Imperial gunships cutting through the azure sky like ominous daggers. Their engines roared louder as they descended, blotting out the suns and casting long shadows over the settlement. The children's laughter fell silent. Men and boys, fathers and sons, emerged from their homes, their faces pale with apprehension. The gunships landed with precision, their hatches hissing open to reveal squads of armored Imperial soldiers. At their head was Commander Valtan, a grim-faced officer whose silver-trimmed armor gleamed in the harsh sunlight. His cold, calculating eyes surveyed the gathered crowd. "People of Eldra," Valtan's voice boomed, amplified by his helmet speakers. "By order of the Galactic Empire, this settlement is to be pacified. Resistance will not be tolerated." A ripple of confusion and fear swept through the crowd. Dorian stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "We're farmers," he said, his deep voice steady despite the storm brewing within. "We've done nothing to provoke the Empire. What is the meaning of this?" Valtan's lip curled in disdain. "You harbor the seeds of rebellion. This colony's isolation makes it a potential breeding ground for dissent. The Empire cannot allow instability to fester." The soldiers moved with military precision, rounding up the settlers. Dorian's sons, barely into their teens, clung to his sides, their faces pale with terror. The air grew thick with tension as Valtan's men separated the adults from the children. "No!" Dorian roared, his powerful voice cutting through the chaos. He surged forward, but the soldiers struck him down with the butt of a rifle. He hit the ground hard, blood trickling from a gash above his brow. One of the boys cried out, trying to break free, but an armored hand yanked him back. "Take the children," Valtan commanded. "Leave no trace of them." The settlers erupted into panicked cries and futile resistance. Dorian struggled to his feet, his vision blurring, but it was too late. The children were dragged away, their pleas swallowed by the roar of the gunship's engines as they ascended into the skies once more. The settlers were left broken and grieving, their spirits shattered. Dorian's bloodied hands clenched into fists as he knelt in the dirt where his sons had stood moments before. His breaths came in ragged gasps, each one a struggle against the tidal wave of despair crashing over him. The Empire had not just taken his sons. They had torn the heart from Eldra itself. Far above, aboard the lead gunship, Commander Valtan observed the scene below with grim satisfaction. Message sent, he muttered to himself. The galaxy will learn that the Empire's reach is absolute. Unbeknownst to Valtan, his actions had set something in motion. Among the settlers of Eldra, the name Dorian Vorthan was just that, a name. But years ago, he had been known by another name, one spoken in hushed tones across the galaxy, the Baba Yaga. The Empire had unwittingly reignited a fury that had lain dormant for years. As night fell over Eldra, the settlers mourned in silence. But Dorian did not mourn. He sat alone at the edge of the settlement, the weight of his loss pressing down on him like the dark skies above. His mind raced, not with despair, but with a cold, unrelenting determination. He had left that life behind, buried the past to protect his family. But the past had found him, and it demanded retribution. The Empire had made a fatal mistake. They had taken his children, not knowing who their father truly was. Now, the Baba Yaga would rise once more, and the galaxy would tremble. The first step of his path was clear. He would find the Empire's trail, no matter how faint, and he would follow it to its source. The hunt had begun,